Hello, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Journey to Stewardship, where we learn to be good stewards of what God has entrusted to us. I'm your host, the Reverend Doctor. And tonight, it's going to be a little tough subject tonight because it's going to require something from you. And you're going to have to listen to what it is that is required of you. Now, we know that God entrusts us with a lot. He trusts us with worldly goods and our health and our funds and our houses and our cars and the luxuries of life. Not only the necessities, but the luxuries of life. So what do we do in return? Are we good stewards with what He gives us? Well, tonight is going to talk about one portion of that. And tonight it is, how do you learn to give if you've never done it before? Well, you have to set a plan. And look, now I know that a man that's been out of work or a woman that's been out of work, got bills to pay in this world. Do I expect them to give a lot to the church as far as finances is concerned? No. But God does. God expects you to do that. He says He'll take care of everything else. You do your part. And your part is a very small part. Your small part is that you have to set up a plan to give 10% or more of your financial resources to the Lord's work. 10% or more. Now, I know that when you sit down and you just started back working and you look at your paycheck you bring home and you said, I got to give 10% of that to God? I don't know. And then you start thinking, but I want to tell you something, that God will take care of that. We talked about it last week, that the widow gave her last. The widow gave her last. And the man of God said that you feed me first. And that meal barrel will never go empty. That oil cruise will never go empty. Which means that the more they used it, the more God blessed it and made it multiply. So what do we do? What kind of plan do we need? So let's look at some things about a plan, okay? Luke 11:42, Jesus said, though you are careful to tithe even the smallest part of your income, you completely forgot about justice and the love of God. You should tithe, yes, but you should not leave these other things undone. See, now if you tithe to the church, but yet you judgmental of people or there's no love of God. Now, I can tell you this right now. If there's no love of God, then I'm pretty sure you're not tithing in the church. I mean, that's a good guess that I can make. I'm pretty sure you're not tithing in the church if you don't have the love of God, if you don't have God in your heart. It'd be very difficult for you to tithe in church. But God said, don't leave the other things undone. I ain't talking about the church folk now. Yeah, you tithe and you go to church, you do all of those things, but yet look at you. You forget about love for your fellow man. And God said, and Jesus said, wait a minute. Yes, you tithe in the church, but don't forget about those other things of mankind, which is the love of God and justice for your mankind. Deuteronomy 14:22-23. Be sure to set aside a tenth of all that your fields produce. The purpose of tithing is to teach you to always put God first in your life. That's a good way to put God first. That's a good plan. That plan is that you tithe first. That means you're putting God first. You tithe first. That means you're putting God first. And watch God work in your life. Tithing first. That means you're putting God first. You're not putting mankind first. And God said He'll take care of everything else. He'll pay your light bill, your mortgage, your water bill, your car note. Those things will get paid. And you aren't going to know where they come from. But you trusted God first. Exodus 22:29 says you must be prompt in giving me the tithe. Which means that you've got to be There's got to be a plan for you to set aside to give God his 10%. You say, well, I'll give 10% to the church and the pastor going to be riding around in a nice car. See, you don't have to worry about that. That's not your concern. Your concern is to give your percentage to God. Don't worry about what they are doing with it. They got to answer to God, just like you got to answer to God. And trust me, you will answer. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Don't sit there and say you don't, that you won't. Oh, yes, you will. Because all of us got one more Jordan to cross. We got one more river to cross. Yes. And you will answer. The Bible says that every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. And yes, you will be judged. Genesis 14:20 says Abram gave a tenth of everything. All his produced. Everything he produced. He gave a tenth to God. And Abram now, he eventually God changed his name to Abraham. Abraham. Now that came from being righteous to God. And God, he followed the rule. He followed. Now, 2 Chronicles 31:5 said the people responded immediately and generously with the first of their crops and grain, new wine, olive oil, honey, and everything else. A tithe of all they owned. They faithfully brought in the contributions, tithes, and dedicated gifts, which means tithes and offerings. Now, I don't know if we really believe that. Well, if you believe the Bible, then yes. But you got to set up a plan first, a plan. You just can't just haphazardly do it. You got to have a plan. So you set up a plan to give 10%. God said, that's all I want is 10%. 10% of your fund, 10% of your, think about 10% of your house. That's helping out a church member. They might need a place to stay for the night. Somebody came in from out of town. Instead of them staying at a hotel, offer them a room in your house. Giving something back. Your car. Pick somebody up and take them to church if they need a ride. That's something. Giving a portion back. Your funds, your finances, 10%. God say give 10% of your funds. The tithe is 10%. The Bible speaks of that. Now I want to read something to you, and I want you to listen carefully. And don't you ever forget this. Malachi, book of Malachi, chapter 3. The book of Malachi, chapter 3, starting at verse 8. And I'm reading from the King James Version. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with the curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground, neither shall your vine cast up fruit before the time in the field, saith the Lord of hosts. And there's a lot that's going on in there. That when you reach your plan to give, now I know you got somebody got to work up to 10%, that's okay. But you got a plan to get to 10%. There's a plan. But Malachi, you see, when the people came back from captivity, they were building their homes, but they neglected the church. They built their homes, they were living their lives, but they neglected the church. And so Malachi asked a question, will a man rob God? God said, yeah, you robbed me. You said, well, wait a minute, God, where did I rob you? God said, tithes and offerings. Tithes and offerings. He says, ye are cursed with the curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring your tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And see, this is one of the few times in the Bible that God said, test him. He said, prove me now herewith. Prove me now, saith the Lord of hosts. If I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing, that there should not be room enough to receive it. God said, prove him. Prove him. Test him on your plan of getting up to 10%. And do it faithfully. You might start out with $5, then $6, then $8, or whatever. And you get up to your 10%. And watch how God works along the way. He said he will protect it from the devourer. In other words, he wants 10 cents out the dollar. The 90 cents that's left, he's going to protect it from the devourer. And he's going to make sure that you don't spend it until you need it. That way, on God's plan, you got more money than month. On your plan, you got more month than money. Now, how does that working out for you? God said he would take care of you. God said he would take care of you. He would take care of you. So, the 10%. But you have to have a plan. 10% is just the beginning. And I can tell you this right now from experience. Until I got on God's plan, I was always broke. Money was running through my pocket. As fast as I make it, fast as it was gone. And then I got on God's plan. And then things started happening. I started having more money. All my bills were paid. Because I remember one time, I told my wife, I said, we paid all our bills and we got this much left over. Now this is the same amount of money now. I said, we got this much left over. I said, what bill didn't we pay? And we went down the list and we paid all the bills, showed the receipts, and we still had money left over. And I knew then that God's plan was the plan to be on. Now, you can take for what it's worth. When I gave church, I didn't care about where the money went. That didn't bother me. That was no concern of mine. My concern was following what God said. God said you give tithes and offerings to the church. And he will open up the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing. You ain't got room enough to receive it. But he said he will protect it from the devourer. See, the devourer comes along and just nibbles at it. But he nibbles at it all the time. So you know how it is when you try to save some money for something, and then all of a sudden, this happened, you got to pay, and this happened. And then there's not a lot, not big things, what we call nickel and dime. Then nickel and dime you to death. And then it eats up all the money. That's the devourer. And then God said he will make sure that your vine does not cast her fruit before the time in the field. In other words, you're not going to produce any fruit until it's necessary, until you need it. So he said he'll take care of you. And you're not going to spend anything out of that 90 cents until you need it. Until you need it. And he will protect it from the devourer. So he would make 90 cents go further than $1 ever will. But that's on God's plan. And I know that you're not going to. I mean, listen, I'm being realistic here. If you've been out of work, or if you've been working, and you, as we say, we live in paycheck to paycheck, how am I going to give God 10% of this? If I give him 10%, then I can't pay my bills. But yes, there is 10% in there. You just have to rearrange your spending. The money you throw away on other things. And you know what I'm talking about. We don't need to get into that list. We ain't got that kind of time. But those things you give to the church and watch God work. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm a prime example of it. How do you think I got my house? It had to have been God. It had to have been God. So I know. And that time that my wife and I paid all our bills with the same money we've been having, and we tested God. And God showed me. So now I am a believer. Got to tithe to the church. You say, well, I tithe to the church, the pastor of the church riding around in Bentleys and everything, and he's taking the money from poor people and, whatever. That's why I don't go to church. Look, don't blame somebody else for you not going to church. That don't make no sense. But you expect God to do things for you when you sit around and say, well, that's why I don't go to church. That's not why you don't go to church. You don't want to go to church because you don't want to. It ain't because of what somebody else is doing with the money. That's just an excuse. Give God what's his. Are you being a good steward? Are you being a good steward with what God entrusted to you? Now, let me give you, and I want you to listen to this. This is what happens when you give 10% to the church, to God's work. Look at what happens. The generous amount of money you'll be able to give to the Lord's work. 10% over time, look at how much you've given to God's work. You said you wanted to be a good steward, then be one. The deepening of your spiritual life through trusting the Lord to meet your need. Deepening your spiritual life. Trusting that when I give this 10%, oh yes, it hurts. Oh yes, it hurts. But trusting God. You have a deeper spiritual life through trusting God. And I noticed that my spiritual life has been strengthened by my trusting God. My trusting God. The increased ease in which you meet your other financial obligations on the 9/10 of the income you have left, or the 90% you have left. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to meet those obligations with less money. With less money. So it had to be God. It's got to be God. Nothing else. Nothing else. I'm telling you. We got a God of and, not a God of or. We got a God of and this, and that. He multiplies. So that means he'll make you do more with less. And how easy it will be. The way that starting to give 10% leads to more generous giving than you ever dreamed possible. You realize you give 10%, you say, well, wow, I can give more to God's work. I can volunteer my time. I can use my talent because I got on God's giving plan. Didn't let anything get in the way. And yes, things do get in the way of God's plan. The effect faithful giving has in making you a wiser manager over all the rest of the money and possessions you have, which means that you're more careful now. That you're more careful, that you watch where your funds go. That you're managing your other financial obligations with ease. That you become a better manager of what God has entrusted to you. That means you become a better steward, a better steward. The unexpected provisions that God brings into your life. I'm telling you now, if you come up with a plan and you follow that plan through, you'll be able to testify that when you got on God's plan, your life changed. Everything around you changed. It was easier for you to pay your bill. You could do things. Things were coming your way. God was opening up windows, pouring out blessings. And you know it was God. And you know it was God. And you know it was God. And the last one, and you'd be surprised that you wish you had started giving 10% sooner. Now, I said that I didn't believe it. I tested God. I tested him. And I did it. And I did it. Then I realized my thought pattern changed. That I had to give my tithes to the church. And then I said, well, you know what? I could have been doing this all along. But it took a testing of God at a time when I didn't have, and I called him and I said, I'm gonna test God. I'm gonna see if he gonna do what he said he gonna do. And yes, he did. And that made a believer out of me. So I don't mind giving to the church. I don't mind giving my finances to the church. You say, well, the pastor, go spend the money and stuff like that. I'm a pastor of a church. No, it don't operate like that. Now, you have mega churches, yes, and a lot of them, what people don't realize is they make a lot of their money off book deals and appearances and motivational speeches and things like that. The church got bills to pay. Trust me, the church has light bill, water bill, gas bill, phone bill, you name it, the church got those things. That building has those things. So it looks like the pastor is taking the money from the church, but really the pastor is making all of his money, the majority of his money, through speaking engagements and writing books and holding seminars and things like that. But see, you don't see those things because you think you're giving your money to the church and you're giving your money to the pastor. No, you're not. You're giving your money to God. You're being a faithful servant. You're being a faithful servant. A faithful servant. Well, the clock on the wall says I got to go. I want to make a plea tonight. I'm trying to get to the next level of YouTube. YouTube says in order for me to get to the next level, I need 1,000 subscribers. So I'm asking you and your friends to go out on YouTube, search for Pastor Jeffrey Goodine, and subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to get to the next level of YouTube so that I can expand this ministry. And I need your help to do it. I'm just one person. I need 1,000. So I'm asking you to go out, your friends, go out on YouTube and search for Pastor Jeffrey Goodine and subscribe to my channel. And while you're out there, you take a look at some videos that I have. And there's some videos out there from a long time ago when I didn't have as much gray hair and I didn't have the beard or the goatee. So I ask you to please help me on this. I appreciate it. Well, that means I got to go. And this has been another edition of Journey to Stewardship. I'm your host, the Reverend Doctor. And I always end by saying, well done, thy good and faithful servant.